This week, I'm doing something a little bit different. It's been a while since I've done a car video, but I think you're really going to like this one. This is a 2004 Holden VZ Commodore. It's done over 280,000 kilometers, and for a car that is 20 years old, it's got its fair share of cosmetic issues and bad brakes and fogged over headlights, sagging headliner, rips in the seat. And vehicles like this tend to be thrown away on the scrap heap and someone will just go out and buy a new vehicle. Especially because the cost to repair a lot of these things is expensive when you factor in labor costs. But if you do some of this yourself, you can save quite a bit of cash. So I've borrowed this family member's ute to do some work to it, to keep it on the road as long as possible. This Australian ute is something that is unfortunately a dying breed, as most people now have dual cab, big American trucks. The old little Aussie ute is something unfortunately becoming a thing of the past. So we want to keep this one on the road as long as possible, even with its high Ks on that engine. I've got my mate here, James, helping me out along the way with a few of these little bits and pieces. I'll leave his info down in the description. But as for this ute, it's time it got a little bit of a makeover. There's no better place to start than the brakes. I've purchased some replacement pads, some brake clean, brake lubricant and copper grease, along with a piston compressor and a few other items that we'll use later on. The first step is to of course remove the wheel to access the brake caliper. It's easiest to crack the nuts free while the vehicle is still on the ground to prevent the wheel from spinning. Then we can find a safe jacking point, lift the car up and finish removing the wheel. Here is our rotor and caliper assembly. While it looks quite rusty and dirty, this is actually quite normal. The rotor I won't be replacing as it looks good enough, but those Repco branded brake pads are coming right out. Just one bolt needs to be removed before the caliper can be lifted up, revealing our two brake pads. They still have loads of material left, but their performance is quite bad. I have no confidence in them whatsoever. I'm hoping some quality pads will improve the stopping distance and responsiveness of the brakes. I purchased these ceramic pads to replace the carbon style pads currently installed, hopefully giving us a little bit more braking performance. Before they go in, I'll lubricate the caliper guides. They just slide out of place with their respective dust cap. After cleaning off the old grease, I can apply some replacement. Making sure to properly seat the dust cap on installation. I'll repeat this process with the other side. It comes out with the caliper, and as it's still connected to the car with the hydraulic line, I'll have to hold onto it while re-lubricating its guide. The next step can be done a few different ways, but we need to push the pistons back into the caliper to accommodate the new thicker pads. As your pads wear down, the pistons protrude further. Using a clamp or special tool, you can push it back in, using the old brake pad as a buffer. As I only had to push mine a few millimeters, I didn't have to relieve any pressure to make the piston move, although I have seen others attach a one-person bleeder to make pushing the piston a bit easier. Next, I'll clean off the inside of the caliper and the guides for the brake pads, before lubricating them with copper grease. This will help minimize brake noise. I also applied some on the back of the caliper where it makes contact with the brake pads. The pads can then be installed in the correct orientation before the caliper is closed down. I'll need to make sure that metal clip is on the outside of the caliper, and then the bolt can be reattached. Mine had a ridiculous amount of Loctite on it, which I had to clean off with a wire brush before I could apply some new Loctite and install the bolt. With the caliper reassembled, it's time for the wheel to go back on before we test out the brakes. It's important to give the pedal a few pumps after installing new pads, as this will allow the pistons to align themselves to the new pads. Once the wheel has been torqued down to spec, it's time to repeat this process on the other side. Having only worked with drum brakes in the past, I have to say this newer style is a lot easier to work with. The hardest thing of this whole process is finding a good spot to jack the car up from. Replacing the pads was easy. No one is really trying to stop those who replace their own brakes, but change a battery in your smartphone and suddenly you're the biggest daredevil alive. I have just recently launched a Patreon. $1 a month gets you discounts on used phones at the Hugh Jeffrey store, insight into upcoming videos, and you could be one of the first to access my new app. The back brakes were a different story than the front. Besides the use of gasket maker where I would have put some copper grease, these pads were already Bendix pads, the brand I was replacing the front ones with. Given there's sufficient material left, I put them back in and didn't replace any of the back brakes. It was now time for a road test. I applied light brake pressure at 80 kilometers an hour and it stopped. It was by no means a scientific test, but the cows seemed to enjoy it. Overall, this 2004 Holden VZ Commodore Ute runs really well. Even with 280,000 Ks, it doesn't feel like it. And I think with regular maintenance and keeping up with any small little defects that come along in years to come, there's no reason that this car can't stay on the road. I think it's got plenty of life left in it. Next, it was time for a wash, not just because it was covered in dirt and bird droppings, but to prep it for paint correction. I need to be able to tell the difference between dirt and actual paint damage. With the Ute clean, we can head down to the local auto shop to have some paint mixed up using the car's color code. For a white car, you wouldn't think it would have yellow and black in the paint, but it does. I recently was quoted $800 to fix a small chip on my car. This touch-up paint was only $25. I'm going to start with the front bumper. It's got a lot of scrapes, so I'll sand it as smooth as I can before applying a bit of primer before the top coat. I found the brush included with the paint was too small for the size of the paint damage, so I used a larger one. While car paint is traditionally sprayed on, if you don't have the means to or don't want to repaint the whole panel, a brush works quite well. I will need to apply 2 coats to conceal the black plastic, repeating this process for the remainder of the front bumper. Above the headlight was the beginning of a rust spot. Likely caused by a stone chip. We'll need to take care of it before it spreads. I simply sanded away the surface rust, primed and painted. Hopefully this will keep it at bay. The back bumper was a similar story to the front one, just with more damage. While these cheap repairs won't be perfect, they'll conceal the damage and make the car look much better. There was also another rust spot under the license plate. If I hadn't have removed it for filming, it would have gone untreated. Quite possibly the worst part of rust in this car is the bottom of the driver's side door. The cause appears to be this plastic strip that's adhered to the bottom. It's holding water underneath it and rusting out the door. So I ripped it off and wire wheeled the whole bottom strip of the door. This is where spray paint would be ideal. I could just mask off the lower part of the door and spray it. But a can of spray paint is another $50, so I'll just stick to my brush. After all, no one is looking at the bottom of the door. I just want to stop the rust. For this, I actually used a different metal primer designed to stop rust, and it's white. So while it does look like I just applied the top coat here, there was a primer used. I've also checked the drain holes and they are not blocked. Most of the bumper clips had also come out, creating panel gaps. I could just lift up each panel and clip them back in. There's always been the smell of petrol, especially when you're driving around with the windows down. While that might be alarming, for this ute it couldn't have been an easier fix. The old fuel cap seal had simply gone bad and was letting fuel fumes escape from the tank. Another super common problem with old cars is foggy headlights. Remember the days when headlights were made of glass and never deteriorated, and never became so foggy other drivers couldn't see your indicators. The 80s cars were the last with glass headlights. Ever since, we've now been left with these inferior plastic versions. I purchased an expensive headlight restorer kit to see if it would actually make a difference. $50 later, and I was pretty disappointed to find out it was literally just sandpaper and a polish compound. A total rip-off, but does it actually work? I followed the kit's instructions to polish, sand with 3 different high-grit sandpapers, and finish with another polish. The end result? It actually did make an improvement. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Just remember, you don't need an expensive kit, just the right sandpaper and polish. The sanding tool from the kit failed once it became a little wet from sanding. The kit also only included enough sandpaper to restore 1 set of lights. Actually pathetic for the $50 price tag. Another issue with this ute is its automatic antenna only extends part way. Because it's getting stuck, there's a risk of burning out its motor, and why create more trouble having to replace the whole unit when we can get this one working again with some silicone spray. It took quite a few cycles of cleaning, spraying lubricant, and trying to extend the antenna. It turns out there was a whole nother section that wasn't extending. I had to give it a helping hand quite a few times till it was all lubricated and working correctly again. Next, it was time to replace the speaker grille. What we didn't realize at the time was that you're not supposed to remove it without taking the door trim off first. There is one screw for the speaker grille that can be accessed after removing the bottom door trim screws, but there's still several unremovable lock washers attached to the plastic pegs of the grille. As we couldn't free them and the grille was broken anyway, we just cut it out, being careful of the door trim and the speaker below. Once out, the new grille could be fitted into place. Focusing our attention on the inside, it's time to get it cleaned up and looking more presentable. It looks as though something sticky has been spilt over the gear shifter, collecting every little bit of dust and hair like a magnet. This wasn't a job for the old spray and wipe. I needed something a little bit more powerful, so I cracked out the adhesive and goo remover, scraping it away with a metal trowel. I'm sure you could all do without the close-up, but here it is anyway. I just hope you weren't eating while watching this. Once the bottom is clean, I can move the shifter down as far as it goes to clean the top section, making sure to have the handbrake applied first so the car doesn't start rolling. From here, it's just a straightforward spray and wipe for the dash and steering wheel. After which, I can get these seat covers off, which if you've ever removed some before, you'll know it's always a bit of a challenge. Underneath, the seats are looking quite dusty. I think the seat covers have been shedding this grey dust, but it's not a big deal as I can just vacuum it up. While I've got the vacuum out, I'll do the floors and clean the pedals. I have heard the ute seats are supposed to have a lever to drop down the top section of the seat. These seats lack that, so they're likely replacements out of a Commodore sedan. As for the headliner, the foam has disintegrated, so while the backing and the fabric are intact, the foam is causing it to sag. I'm going to attempt to repair it by cleaning off as much of the old foam as possible using a vacuum and adhesive remover, then spraying some new adhesive to reattach it. This worked for the small area I was able to clean the old foam off. For the remainder of the liner, it's still not sticking. I have heard of people using staples to hold it up, but I think that would just be too dodgy for me. The only proper way to fix it would be to remove it and do it right, something I'm not going to be able to do today, and this might be a job worth paying someone else to do. The only other thing we need to do is remove all the old stickers. The previous owner was apparently a firefighter, and they stuck that sticker right where I look when changing lanes. We also don't care about the dealership who sold the car, or the remnants of an old Rego sticker. Remember those? They went out like 10 years ago. And we're done. So it's taken a couple of days and a couple $100, but this 2004 Holden ute is looking much better. It's not perfect, but that's a good thing because it's a ute. You want to be able to put things in the back of it and not be too precious about it, but still have it looking nice enough that you don't feel like you're driving around in a complete bomb. And I think we've achieved that with this car. The headlights aren't perfect, but they're much better than they were. The paint correction looks perfect from a distance, but when you get up close, you can see where we have touched up the paint. Interior-wise, it's looking better than it did, although it's still not perfect. But I think this has been a fantastic little project and is definitely something that if you have an older car and you want to keep it looking a little bit nicer, spend a couple $100 on it and you can actually get quite a long way with it if you're doing most of that work yourself. If you like this sort of content, I do have one other car video on the channel, but I'm hoping that maybe I could do another one of these later in the year. Mum's got a Holden Astra, which is got paint damage, its seals are melting, there's some roof racks that are just sort of peeling away. But as for this ute, it's just about as good as it's going to get, unless I spent a lot of money doing a full paint job or something like that. But for an old ute, it's not looking too bad. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you're not already subscribed, go and click that subscribe button and check out the new Patreon channel, which I've just started. $1 a month, you can get extra content, $5 off the Hugh Jeffreys store, and much more. Check it out at patreon.com/HughJeffreys. And if you're looking for any used devices, such as phones, tablets, and computers, check out my online store, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.